Hey everyone, welcome to the Power 365 show. Today we chat with Sameer. He's a cricket lover, poet, storyteller, who also happens to be a principal program manager at Microsoft. He works with the Power Platform, specifically on the CAT team, which we're going to go into details. We hear from Sameer today about his personal journey. We discuss what the Center of Excellence is and how you can establish them within your organization. Full show notes will be found at nz365guy.com/116. Now let's get on with the show. Sameer, welcome to the Power 365 show.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on. I've been following some of the work you've been doing, especially with some of the recent podcasts. It's been fun and
Excellent.
An absolute pleasure to be here. Yep.
Thank you. It's interesting in that I just noticed that your accent and the sound of your voice is very similar to Satya's after just talking about him. I know, right? There's definitely a similarity.
Okay, well, I should. I'm sure our AI models might be able to point out if that's true or not. That's interesting.
Yeah,
it's
totally,
not. All
totally.
I can say is it's absolutely not deliberate. Although that would be a pretty good career move.
Yeah, you could be his voiceover coach or something like that. As AI progresses, you know how they're saying that they now can really take a video and make the lips do whatever they want. You could be the voice that says whatever the alternate story is.
Yeah, it's they can title it when Satya's having a bad day. Here's what he says, and then they throw me in or something
That's
like
it.
that.
That's it. Sounds good. So tell me, Sameer, what part of the world do you come from? Where do you live now?
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in Bombay, in the city of Mumbai, in India, and I came to the United States to study computer science. So actually, I've been now in Seattle longer than I was in Bombay. I've been in Seattle since '97, and that's home at the moment with my wife and two kids. Home, of course, is India.
So do you go back to Mumbai very much?
We were last there in December with the kids, with the family, which I try and go back once a year or, once every 18 months. Love it every time. Yeah.
Is it much of a trip from Seattle? As in, how long does it take you to get down there?
I go over through Europe or through Dubai. So there's, if the connections are good, it's about 20 hours. It's a long flight to Dubai and then a short one from there to Bombay. So it's not too bad. The jet lag is what gets you.
Yeah, exactly. And so what about when you're not working? What do you get up to in Seattle?
Oh, man. So I would say weekends are just mostly with the kids. The
family.
Kids and family. Yeah, my daughter is almost 10 and my son is 7. And so there's constantly stuff trying to, go around and do things with them. We live over in this little pocket in the Queen Anne neighborhood in Seattle, which is sort of like in the city, but its own mini village on top. They had a big garage sale this weekend, so they were busy. My son was busy wheeling and dealing, trying to get a deal on his Lego sets. So it's stuff like that, it's just usually unplanned stuff that we just go with the flow on weekends.
Yeah. I've heard that, Seattle has changed a lot. If you've been there since '97, kind of have you seen the city change with, as I say, all the tech companies have bought up all the prices are going up. It's becoming like San Fran in a way. Are you seeing that?
So, so it's changed a lot in many ways. So absolutely. I think, earlier on from a tech side, I would say my experience has been, I've always lived in Seattle and then commuted across to Redmond and now Bellevue. It used to be, since Microsoft was, on the east side, most of the folks were here and then not as much in Seattle. And then the last 10 and particularly 5 years, I think with, Amazon, Google, Facebook, all of them, then various startups, it really has increased. And I don't know, in multiple ways. On one hand, I even shy away. I think of it as, oh man, look at what those techies are doing. And then I look at myself, okay, I guess I'm one of them as well, and so it's interesting. I mean, it's certainly getting a lot of growth. I think I always, when I join into other circles that are outside of tech, I do sometimes think about what it does to the overall balance, and partly my personal perspective there, it's, yeah, we have these high level abstract policy type conversations and what's good and what isn't good. At the end of the day, I think it's more about people, getting stuck in their own little pockets. So for me, when I did get out of that a little bit, and I go and meet up with, say, a writer group in Seattle, where no one really cares there what you do for a living per se, that's refreshing, and I hope there's more of that, which then is so it's less about tech versus non-tech or stuff like that.
So, listen, I found it interesting. One of the things you just mentioned there was a writing group. And when I asked you about what did you do, you talked about family, etc., but it didn't mention writing. So tell me a bit about your passion for writing.
Yeah, it's sort of all intertwined with where things have gone. So when I would say when I left Microsoft, I was thinking of leaving Microsoft, and we can get back on that, on kind of my journey, because I'd started here in 97, left in 2014. And I was sort of ready to leave at that point in time, wanted to look at doing something different. Around the same time, I ended up somehow writing poetry, which was quite unexpected. Especially, I had this identity, I would say, of myself as this, technology PM person. And there's that little voice in the head going, "Hey, what are you doing writing poetry?" But it sort of grew. It was I don't know how to explain it, because it wasn't really planned. It was just probably an outlet in some ways, or a way of writing thoughts down in a different way than I usually would. And then I got connected with, I think it was 2014, where I went over to an open mic night in Seattle. And I was sort of shy, sitting at the back, watching what they're doing. A friend had suggested, she's like, "You should go check this out. You might like it." It's the Hugo House in Seattle. And I went back, and, every month since then, almost, I've been trying to go once or twice a month to go and read. It's great group. It's just a group of people that they're 5-minute reads. They call it works in progress. You go and read stuff that's literally in progress. There's no critiquing, nothing of that sort. And so it was extremely refreshing for me just to get out of my usual day-to-day and work, and take some of the stuff that I thought was never going to get out of my journals. And, these things, it just, they sit there, and somehow I found myself up sharing it with other people, which kind of then got a cadence going. I wanted to write a bit more, to have something more to say, and everyone's participating in that way, which was fun, interesting, really different and unexpected.
So it's so good. And I think it's such a different skill than, if you like, traditional book writing, is that, with poetry, I find that you capture a whole range of concepts that might take an author, 30 pages to write, but you catch it in poetry and distill, if you like, just to the essence. And I find that always intriguing, like portraiture photography, when someone takes a photo of somebody and they can capture a whole story. And I feel that's where the picture paints 1,000 words comes from. How did it become an outlet for you?
Yeah, so what you're saying about the poetry part, absolutely. But I think it's, art in general, where something is not as structured and planned, but it's more in the moment. You have impression of something, and it kicks off from there. I think again, it wasn't planned, but if I wind back a little bit, remind me your question. You said, how did it all come about for me a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, at Microsoft, I was in, let's say, multiple roles, starting off. Just unbelievable. I remember commenting in my early years here, like, you could pay me half of what I was getting, and it's absolutely what I'd be doing. Love the company, team, the work I was doing, all of that. I would say about 10 years in, I had a little bit of kind of stepping back and thinking, what am I doing? Where is this all going? And from a career perspective, team, manager, everything was fantastic. So I didn't have, intellectual reasons to complain. But something didn't seem quite to fit, perhaps internally in some way. So I made a few changes. That was more job wise, and I ended up moving into a from an engineering position into a program management position. Took a few different flavors, moving from more deep platform work on Windows to going out and connecting with customers, doing some work in a startup business group, working with mobile first technologies in the field. That group then in 2010 or so got moved into Bing. And so I was in the Bing Mobile group. So that was, I would say, my career track, right? I was in Bing Mobile, a few different sort of roles, and moved between program manager for features and PM lead. At the same time, I would say I was, really finding myself more interested in, how would I describe it? Like really the so-called people side of things. Like we're doing this work with technology, and it's great. I can do it, but I didn't see, there was some part of me that was just like, I don't think I want to be well, I don't want my manager's job, right? That was super clear to me. I did not, it seemed like they were doing more of the things that I didn't quite like. And I liked, a number of aspects of my work, but it just was all not fitting together. So I kind of stepped back. I decided, I even asked, and there's a kind of longer story here, but I ended up asking if I could go part-time because I was ready to leave. I just wanted to get a break. And somehow, which seemed a bit odd how it transpired in my mind, was I was able to go part-time in my program management role. Took on some projects that we could, structure it so I didn't actually have to leave the company. And that in some ways, that just created some more space, right? Which is what I was looking for. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I know I didn't want to just jump into another tech role at another company or even another team around here. It was a bit different. Within that space, I think I connected a lot more with, so this is all sort of tied together for me at least. I connected with, there's a fantastic group of people in Seattle who run a Pathwise Leadership program. So that was one element of it. I almost describe it as, for me, it was probably the first time in my adult life that I had folks that I would think of as, real teachers and mentors. Not just a manager who often is a good mentor, but it's in a different way, providing a broader perspective. And I got involved with a few different communities. And I think that process of stepping out a little bit, connecting with different people, there's a group there's sort of a conference-like thing in Portland that happens once a year, started by Chris Gillibor, where it's called the World Domination Summit, which is kind of a tongue-in-cheek name. They just named it that because that's what they could. It was a fun way, and I looked at it. It was the kind of stuff that I didn't really do at all in my first 10, 12 years at Microsoft. I was having fun. I was busy, kind of the standard work hard, play hard cliche, which was great, but it allowed me to step out. So this thing was really folks coming together with a tagline of how do you live a remarkable life in a conventional world, right? That's there. And then things were circled around it with these values of community, adventure, and service. And that related to me, and I ended up taking time out to go do things like that from it. So getting back to the poetry question, it's related in that the space gave me time to step away, and I was a bit, as you could probably see, I was a bit disillusioned with what I was doing, and I didn't have answers. And I think to your point earlier of saying how poetry tends to take, what might take it distills things down, and it wasn't a technical craft or any of that for me, right? Even now, I've probably taken just one or two actual poetry classes. I wouldn't even have called myself a poet at all in any ways. Now I guess I've read enough that I could throw on that coat every now and then. But it was just sitting. I mean, I literally remember that one night I sat and I read a blog post, and someone said it was by Leo Babauta, and he was like, just sit down and write a poem. You don't have to be a poet to write a poem. And I remember sitting and writing like 5 lines. And I looked back, I was like, wow, this is not bad actually,
Wow. Nice.
and there was something about it that was refreshing. So that maybe got the ball rolling a bit. And I think eventually in 2016, I must have written 35 to 40 pieces or so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
So,
So if people listening, they want to see a bit of your material, is it all up on Medium?
yeah,
Pretty much.
it's not all there. There's the stuff that I felt there is stuff there. Man, I never thought my worlds would be colliding here. Here I was, keeping my tech life separate, and you've dragged it in. So it's good. No, it's good. It's good. I'd put it. I do have things on some pieces on Medium, medium.com. You can find me there at Sameer Bhangar. A lot of it, I don't really broadcast it. It's more to share with people who are interested. When I went for some of these events, I like the medium, no pun intended, of Medium. So I put stuff there. Yeah, it's some pieces. Yep.
It's good. It's good. It's good. It's good.
Yeah, I mean, I was, speaking of poetry, I was curious, so if I'm going to ask you a quick question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I was looking at, because you took some time off as well, right? With a sabbatical. And I was just scanning through your feed. And what showed up was all these like art paintings. I don't know, like at least that's what struck for me. During your travels, there's a number of like street art that stood out.
Totally.
And to me, that's very linked. So I was just curious on where does that come from, and what would you think of it for you as a sort of poetry in some way?
So for me, is like I was brought up in a home that, if you like, art or creativity wasn't encouraged. And so it was all about working hard, doing a hard day's work, that type of thing. And so as I never considered myself artistic until taking the time off and going away on a sabbatical. And I ended up being on a sabbatical for 18 months. And it gave me that opportunity to really look at the world, I suppose, through different lenses. I started reading a lot. I started outside of technology as well. And really I just found like I've gotten heavily into photography now. I'm starting to do a lot of writing myself. And of course, I've explored poetry. I like the concept of portraiture and how that relates to poetry as well from a photography perspective. So yeah, I think that I don't know, the older I get, the more I feel like I'm wanting more balance and everything, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it completely does. So to me, like what you described to me, that's sort of it, right? The same thing. And it's like you see these things that feel a bit meaningful and you find some way to capture it, whether that's through a camera or through down on paper or just mentally. And I hear you on the getting older bit as well.
So did you take time off and take a bit of a sabbatical, or did you leave Microsoft for a period? What was the story?
That's correct. So I left in 2014. I took 6 months off where I didn't do anything. I traveled a little bit, but it wasn't planned at all. The whole idea was, I'm going to spend some time before I see what I do next. And I switched. I didn't quite want to get back into exactly the same role. I ended up doing quite different work that's more related to working with people, running some training programs, working as a consultant with a friend. She had a company called Simple Intentions that was running team workshops at places like Microsoft, Amazon, Expedia. So it was super interesting to have this, different hat on, where I went back in to places like Microsoft, but I came in as a consultant and someone leading a workshop, and whether that workshop was under the umbrella of so-called work-life balance, although I feel extremely hypocritical saying that because I don't know if I genuinely have that. I remember someone came up to me at one of these workshops. I was like, so now that you have found balance in your life, and before, he could say anything else, I was like, hang on, I don't know if that's true. It's more focused around, okay, what are some things that we can be a bit more aware of and do a bit more intentionally than just continuing to go with the flow, right? So it's that I did that, ran a few these manager immersion programs, which was a 6-month program, some of it back with Microsoft, which is again fascinating because I felt like I had a strong cultural context and understanding of the company. And through my own reading and the work I'd done with Pathwise, kind of I was able to bring that side in without having a formal coaching degree as such. But there's elements that I'd picked up and was able to bring that back in. And it seemed like that combination of me bringing an engineering background at Microsoft along with this side seemed to land, even though, because there's a part of me going back in a role like that had this imposter syndrome type feeling. But it was fun. I mean, super, super meaningful. I know it wasn't, for me personally, it became clear that I didn't want to, build a brand around myself as a coach, or, it didn't quite seem that time in life to do that as yet. So I was still looking at what's the right balance, if you will, of things I want to do. And then that's what, funny enough, got me back into Microsoft.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what year was that you came back into Microsoft?
Yeah, so 2016, I was having lunch with Saurabh, who leads our team, and we were chatting. It was really small. PowerApps was in the preview days back then. It had just gone from Project Sienna to PowerApps. This was about July of 2016. And he had, I had time available. I had some consulting projects that I was doing, but I had time and was looking for some additional part-time work. So, that came back as a contract consulting role with the team. It was funny. I remember I think of for a period of time, I so clearly, there was this one day where in the morning, I was over in another building at Microsoft working with a finance manager there, talking about how she's building up more trust and so-called psychological safety on the team and doing these sort of coachy type things. From there, I go into another one of these sort of more high level-ish conversations. And then the afternoon, I'm copy pasting screenshots to create the app in a day content. Right. And there's this, I loved it. I mean, for me, it wasn't like, oh, I'm more this and why am I doing this versus that. The combination of being able to be deep into spreadsheets and screenshots, along with talking about how we're really talking about culture, the combination of that was great. And in some ways, I feel like that's continued on. Of course, PowerApps and the whole thing just kept growing and growing. And my other projects wound down. And so eventually I decided to just take the plunge and come back full time, as an FTE role in 2018. Yep.
Okay, so you're part of what's known as the CAT team, is that right? In PowerApps?
That's correct. So it's yeah.
Yeah, can you break that down?
Sure. Yeah, it's the customer advisory team for PowerApps, Flow, and the Common Data Service. It's very, in some ways, you could think of, for other platforms like Azure, which is, of course, much, much, much more mature, has a CAT team. What we do is, so I can break it down by, I think of it in two ways, right? It's like why we exist and then what we do. And often we'll define by what we do. And I can walk through a few key buckets there. But even before that, I think the reason of why we even exist, I think it is to be literally be the in-between and help be the glue between the engineering team and customers, partners, the Microsoft field. And I would say particularly, and a lot of this is even, my opinion, it's not necessarily what any CAT team might do. It's highly, relative to where you are in the product journey. And for PowerApps, it was early preview days. It had just started. So Saurabh had, it was him, Pratap, and a couple of development vendors, just anyone who was willing to do any POC, they were in there, helping them and getting it going and providing strong feedback back to the product team to just keep chugging away. So I think for me, we exist really to be that bridge and connection, But go
So
out. Yeah. Go
so
ahead.
so you're the just to clarify
Yeah.
that. So between engineering and then kind of customers, partners, field, you're kind of the liaison between those two working groups, if you like.
Yeah, we sit within engineering, so we're in James Phillips's org.
Yep, yep.
We don't report up through Charles. You could think of it as Saurabh having a dotted line to Charles, and the pieces on, which is also a healthy dynamic because you're not, we can be more objective in some ways, I think. And then I think the evolution so far at least has been we do what we think is the right thing, gig for the product, for the team, for the customer, probably in the reverse order at a given period of time, right? And that involves, so if I break that down, we go and we'll accelerate adoption. So especially and going into FY20, it'll be focused on people who have the larger PowerApps deals. So we'll go into the Chevrons of the world, let's say, and accelerate their adoption, right? We end up having a set of solution architects who will work with escalations or key projects, or sometimes things will come through that we have expertise on. We'll just jump in and see what's needed. All of that, of course, brings really, really strong and good feedback that we can give back to the product groups, right, to the core engineering group, and in some cells keep ourselves grounded in the customer. We help with the partners as well. So there's a partner program, which we have a set of partners that we work more closely with. And as I describe this, Mark, I think it's constantly changing. So if I think of what we did back in 2016, 2017, we were doing a lot of briefings, POCs, things like that, maybe helping people with their first application. As the platform has scaled, those activities are now more being run by the field, right, or by partners themselves. So we're able to, in some sense, move up that chain. And now we're more involved in helping someone establish a center of excellence, for example. So there's if I take App in a Day as a great example there, where we saw the need that we needed some step-by-step training material, followed in the footsteps of Dashboard in a Day, which was really successful on the Power BI side. That's our sister team. We create that. We ran the first 20 or so sessions, and then we scale that out. And now it's just been great to see others running it, and we can step back. We don't have to be the ones constantly running it. We'll use it to keep experimenting with new content and building on top of it. If I quickly continue on I think the pieces that might be there on what our team also does is there is some part I'm probably doing more horizontal work. I would think of it in general as finding ways to scale via stories, community programs, additional inputs for feedback. We also have put out patterns, practices. There's a COE starter kit would be a great example that we just put out. And we're doing some level of what I might think of as incubation work. So for newer technologies, like AI Builder, for example, which is announced, excitement around it. It's in the preview phase right now. How do we get those early adopters and early customers? And now I see of it as there's a set of people who are already using PowerApps. How can we work with them to keep driving some of the innovation in new areas? So anyway, that seems like a mouthful, but that's
No, but it makes sense.
covers a lot of areas that we're involved with. We're a pretty small team, just 7 people, hopefully growing.
Very good, very good. So you've brought up a bunch of things there that have kind of pinged off with a bunch of questions for me now. Is that so? When the partner program side of things in the early days, you're establishing partners, I suppose, in a way, kind of setting up practices in that area. What's the maturity model you've seen in the partner ecosystem now that we're a couple of years in, and kind of what's the gap?
Yeah, I can tell you. So I'll just from a partner program specifically. So Akansha runs the PowerApps partner program. It's not directly run out of our team. She's, a peer team. under Faisal. So very closely connected. Akansha's attends our weekly scrums, etc. So extremely connected. For me, the I think there's a lot, particularly on the when you ask the gaps. I think on a training and enablement side overall. I mean, the platform is new, but it's growing at such a rapid pace that we're all trying to, keep up in a good way, right? It's exciting, but at the same time, once you have, so it's great for the early adopters who come in, are tinkering around with new stuff. Then we've had a set of key customers who found, really solid success with it. And we have a bunch of stories. We could be spending the whole day just talking about stories. But at the same time, as I think new people and especially large enterprises come on board, they're going to be looking for more like the full established ecosystem, right? And they're going to be looking for what's the partner certification model and who are the, which partners have what levels of practice established. And I think that is still, work in motion. In a good way, right, across the board. And to me, from the other side of it, which I think being involved with a number of partners along their journey, both large and small, it's kind of interesting. The ones that this is what I'm personally most excited about is there's a traditional model where as a partner, you can go in and say, I'm going to build an app for you. I'm going to build a solution for you, right? Tell me, you have this problem. I'll come in. I'll either customize some piece of software or I'll build some piece of software and I charge you for it. And it's often might be transactional. It's great. I charge you for it. Hopefully you're happy with the quality. It does what you want. And I'm, you're a reference for me as a partner and I end up getting paid. And maybe if it goes well, then I also get, say, a support contractor do a V2. And that's great, right? That's really good. The things like the Power Platform, you can absolutely come in and build that and continue it. You hopefully can do it cheaper and faster, and there's a net win. Where it gets super exciting, I think, is once you start almost taking the next level and the conversation goes from, what do you want me to build for you and I'll go build it, to how do we really enable you and empower your organization in this new world of so-called digital transformation, right? Which is a slightly different conversation in my mind, where it's, again, in fact, some of the partners who are really almost disrupting their own model have been interesting, where they go in and say, we don't want to be building apps for you forever. We want to enable you to do that. We'll build the infrastructure pieces. We'll provide the best practices. We'll help you build the first few apps to get you going. But we want to be, almost in some ways we use the term center of excellence, throwing that around quite a bit, but let us help run your center of excellence. And I think that's an interesting place for partners to explore, where you end up getting,
So this sounds like, and it sounds to me a lot like a DevOps scenario where the Power Platform becomes the platform to iteratively develop or migrate internal workloads of a company across on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, you can. Yes, absolutely. So there is, this big where you can start. So say you might start with, there's already a given system. You need to build it, and you migrate that over to the Power Platform. Hopefully, you gain, efficiencies with the tool set. Right. But then you can go around and there's a whole slew of Excel spreadsheets, paper processes that in the process you can start identifying, right? Like literally this is, me as part of the CAT team, but it's the same, I think, happening with partners, where we were over at a customer site and they said, can you just spend time? This was actually more than 2 years back. When we presented them, they said, can you just spend time walking around the shop floor almost and identifying all these different processes with us? And given that you know a bit about PowerApps, maybe you could put a lens on which ones make sense and which don't, right? So I think for a partner to be in that place is awesome, because you're starting to think outside of just point solutions. And then the next piece, though, which I'm also a bit quite passionate about is we think of it as absolutely the efficiencies from having this, DevOps cycle, and the platform lends itself to constant iteration. You're never really quite, done. You're constantly moving is awesome. I think there's also a nurture motion around it that is super interesting, right? Where you're not you're doing that, but then you're also enabling the organization to be more self-sufficient, because it's just cost wise, there's a reason why many of these are still paper processes, Excel systems, because there isn't funding. They're not going to pay partners, consultants to come and create apps for each one. So for me, the solution there often is, how do you enable those people who are the folks who are closest to the ground, deeply understand the nuances of, let's say, the spreadsheet, right, in quotes, enable them. And then I think that can be done through, the organization can do it internally. Many organizations, I think, will need support from partners there as well to come in and drive the whole. I mean, we bucket it as a so-called nurture motion, but there are many aspects, I think, that go in under that.
Yeah, because, the way I see it is that you're engaging with subject matter experts in these organizations, right, that it wouldn't probably consider themselves technologists. And then, but they're going to ultimately end up becoming technologists in a way, right? As in, just by nature of getting more hands-on with things like Flow and PowerApps, they're going to pivot in their careers.
Yeah, I think it's especially the ones that do kind of pick it up. So it partly, to me, from what I've seen, and again, all of this, I think as things scale up, will be interesting to see how it changes and morphs. There are these standard curves, whether it's like crossing the chasm or what, that you have it, but you've got the early adopters who I think have a certain mindset, and it's been fascinating to see them kind of really pick it up, saying, I know my problem, I just need the right tools. And in fact, when I see things like PowerApps, I'm just going to go with it and adopt it, right? And you've got all the way from, someone who would never hire a partner. So if I take like Lauren Taylor, assistant principal at the Tacoma School as an example, like she's her whole class is in teams, first of all. She's got like individual grades all in teams. Yep. It's super well organized. She uses that. She uses OneNote. She saw Flow, and she saw a template related to classroom management. She used that. From Flow, her story was a little funny because she was on a support call where she was having an issue with Flow. The support rep told her, well, for what you're trying to do, you should look into PowerApps. Her response was, are you kidding me? Here I'm having an issue. My Flow isn't working, and you're asking me to try out yet another Microsoft technology. No, thank you. But then she kind of played with it one day, and she was hooked, right? And now she's building these. She's got apps running to make student reading assessments better. Like the teachers are now able to provide all of this additional data. So a student is not just one single number, that you get all the nuance to be able to help them in a richer way. So and then she has a Power BI dashboard against, alongside it to get that data. Funny enough to say how they actually print out then the Power BI dashboards, right, to look at them physically. So, but look at, like, that's an example of clearly of someone who otherwise wouldn't even really consider themselves technologists in any way. Lauren, I love, we did, now that we've, because we heard of Lauren's story and we've shared it a bit this time at the Microsoft Business Application Summit, MBAS for short, Lauren came up and shared her story. And I loved how she started her presentation. She had, I think, 10 slides quickly going one after the other, just pictures describing herself, right? And she goes, I'm a mom, I'm a substitute teacher, I'm an assistant principal, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm a that. The one thing I'm not is a software programmer. Right. And then she went on to show all the stuff she's doing, which is all technology, right? Using technology but it's tied to its technology is much more it's really the means there than the ends, to use a cliche term. It's really, and if it doesn't serve a purpose, that's the other refreshing thing. Meeting a number of folks. I think, me as, let's say, a computer science person, if I start geeking out with something, I'm sometimes happy just doing that. Oh, look, I can do this, and I can do this, and I can do this. See what I can do with this AI thing. What's super fun for me to see with folks like Lauren or Nick Gill from the Red Cross, or, Sumit Saini from Heathrow. Anyway, the list goes on and on. Is that, yes, they will start tinkering, but for a number of them, it's very related to, this is like, I need to get this done. I want to make the life of so-and-so in my team or for myself or my company better. And if it's not serving that purpose, it's not interesting. So
what excites me about these stories is that, there's been a lot of fear that, AI and where technology is going to replace so many job roles. But what we're going to see is just a pivot in job roles. People that had a role over here, all these new roles are now kind of coming to light that the technology is enabling that kind of weren't there 5 years ago. And I think this will be the iteration that we see over and over again. People slowly move on it's almost a digital transformation in their own lives to use technology to solve their real world day-to-day type problems, and therefore gain skills with it that are then marketable, resellable, and they will pivot in their careers.
Yeah, it'd be super interesting to see. That reminds me of you want another quick story?
Yeah, go for it.
Especially speaking with, when you said, how we think of job replacement versus changing, there's been SNCF, the French National Railway, has been a really fantastic, partner, customer to work with, and an early adopter of PowerApps. The work they've done internally with their Center of Excellence and setting up digital schools, all of that is just amazing. But we had the opportunity to visit one of their Techni centers in February. And we walked around, and sometimes I feel like we live, I would say, from a Microsoft context, sitting in a Microsoft office, we're sort of abstracted away. There is this notion of a customer, but it was pretty amazing seeing, like, being there with hard hats and all of that. With someone proudly whips out a tablet and is like, "Here, let me show you what we do." And, it's a Power App. And they'd come with, they showed us a whole set of paper, like stacks of paper that had been replaced by that digital app. And one of them particularly stood out for me. Again, for me, it's a small example of how they get involved in the process. There was a gentleman who really worked in the front lines. They used to have a challenge with communicating with international drivers that came into the Techni Center, right? And small things like, you're not supposed to park here or drop off the stuff there. It's the little things that they'd have these struggles with, almost get into fights sort of with all that miscommunication. He designed the app. Now, he didn't directly go and use the tool, but I think that's a key point as well, that this idea that, first line workers need to be building the apps. Yes, some of them will take it that next level where they actually get involved with the tools, but he ended up literally wireframing out what it might look like to have a simple translation app. 5 buttons, each one maps to a particular text. He can pick a country, even some flags thrown in there to say, okay, I need to say this in this language. He went over then to someone there who knew Power Apps, because that was all already written out. Within a day, he built him a translation app, and now they're using it. And on the ground, he said it's literally reduced like their emotional angst that they have when dealing with people, right? Such a small thing. And then I asked him, again, putting on a techie hat, I was like, why don't you just use Bing Translate or Google Translate, right? That's how we would think. That it's like for them, it's such a difference between having this thing purpose built for them that they designed, like it's their thing, and whether they partner with another citizen developer, whether with a pro dev, with IT, the key point for me there is like, the partnership that it's created, and then the ownership that comes out of it, and then it actually gets used because they've built it. It's not something that IT has thrown over the wall and trying to
Yeah.
get drive adoption around.
Yeah.
That's
So
built in.
good.
Yeah.
So good. I had Melanie from SNCF on my Hack for Good team at
Yes.
BizApp Summit. And
Melanie's
so
awesome.
so good to hear their story. Well, listen, we've covered a bit of ground. I just want one final question: is tell us a bit around how companies can kind of go on the journey of setting up a COE, a center of excellence within their companies.
Yeah.
What type of tools are out there so that they can, we can enable that?
Yeah. So I'll say, I mean, right at the outset, before even getting the tools, just real quick, I would say, the word COE and Center of Excellence sounds like this bigger thing, like, oh, I need to invest people, resources, do something big. So yes, you can do that, but I think the whole point is just getting started, right? Partners in Health, for example, just launched their COEs. As just one data point, their COE is 2 or 3 of them wanting to enable 20 people to be building apps, right? And for them, if they get to 20 people across the organization as a nonprofit, being able to scale up to about 15 to 20 solutions, that is success. That's awesome. Meanwhile, on the other hand, you have someone like Chevron, where their COE team itself is 20 plus people, right?
Yeah.
For the organization. So, so it does. So that's one piece I would certainly say, like, you get started where you're at. The other is, I would, before jumping into any of the tools, and Paul Cumsey does a great job of reminding me of this, is just asking yourself, like, why are you doing this, right? The whole idea of, I think the way I'm just going to use his language, or how he phrases it, is governance is a means and not the end. And we forget that we can put in, like, think of this idea of governance. And if we forget that, the next thing you know, you're busy just ticking boxes, following a playbook. So-and-so did this, Microsoft said this, therefore I'm just going to do it because that's what I'm supposed to do. And you kind of forget why you're even doing it. And so I would, the one talk from MBAS that I would highly recommend looking at, which is really what our team has tried to do with synthesizing what we've learned from these customer engagements, where we see the product going, and with some of the tools and templates available. It's called Tried and Tested Techniques for creating a Center of Excellence. And it walks through these steps. So I'm just emphasizing that because I think that is super key of having a point of view of your own for yourself, right? And what I mean by that is, the why could be, you want to enable citizen developers. You want people who earlier weren't building apps in your organization to be building apps, because that's great, so that, and there's an approach you can take around that. Or you might be, and I think we sometimes might over-index on just the citizen development piece. The other side might be you're the IT department. You've got a set of either professional developers or dedicated IT resources. It's really about creating solutions more rapidly. You're not yet there, or you don't plan to go down the whole citizen development route, and that is totally fine, right? But knowing that up front, that's the approach you're going to take, I think will guide how you incorporate tools. So I can't emphasize that enough, that having that internal conversation, bringing in the key constituents. I think Manuela talked about this really well when you interviewed her, that it ends up being a lot about bringing the IT teams with the business teams, with the so-called citizen developers, with the professional developers, to the right mix to the table. Super important. Next, let's say you've got that piece, you have a line of sight, you now need to want to know how do you what's something concrete that you can work with. Few things. So the way we broke it down, and there are different ways to slice and dice this thing, but we framed it as 4 key buckets. Administration and governance is one of them, which is often we think of that as the main thing, right? I need to manage things. I need to put some security guardrail, do some monitoring, some, automation. So absolutely. And there are tools around that. And I'll get to that. Let me just go through what I think are these four buckets. Saurabh goes through this in great detail in that talk. I think a second bucket is the whole nurture motion, how you're actually going to evangelize, provide training, support, and nurture development. Super important. Like I think I had someone come to me, from a large media company and said, "Hey, so, Sameer, we went out and we turned this thing on and we wanted to get citizen development. We said, here, people, go build apps." And it didn't seem to go anywhere, right? Which is true. You have to be deliberate about how you want to nurture it in your organization. I think a third bucket is thinking about support models, both end user support and developer support, maker support. And that's again will change because you might have traditional support models that are pretty heavyweight. I had someone from a enterprise customer say, well, it takes us 4 weeks to onboard an application into our support system.
Yeah. Wow.
If it's taking a few days to build the app, like the math doesn't add up, right? Which is true. Again, it goes back to you need to have a point of view on maybe you need to tier your applications. There's a Virgin Atlantic, someone created an app to book a yoga room, right? You don't need a huge dedicated support team for that app, right? The owner of that app is well capable of providing support, I think, for them. They just need to be, I think that responsibility and accountability needs to be put back on the maker upfront. It's the same. And it's happening today, right? It's not new particularly. They're maintaining their own spreadsheets. We just don't think of them in the same way because they happen to be sitting on paper or spreadsheets, right? Meanwhile, you can, some solutions, the mission critical ones, the ones that Chevron, for example, talked about at MBAS, those are going to need some more support capability. So I would say you need to think that through. And then the fourth bucket in general, is we just bucket as operations, but it's the piece around automation and optimization. Again, I'd refer to the Chevron talk. They're probably one of the furthest ahead I've seen from an automation perspective.
That's brilliant. So those are four. What was the first one? I got nurture, support model, and operations. What was the first one?
The first is administration and governance.
Admin and governance. Great.
Yep. And I can give you a quick pointers to I think some resources that folks might enjoy.
We're going to be out of time right now, but what I'll do is I'll get you to send me an email with the links, and I'll put them in the show notes so people can grab those resources.
Absolutely. Yep. This starter kit and the admin in a day would be two.
Awesome.
For sure.
Golden. As you can see, we've not got to a lot of the stuff I wanted to cover, so I might schedule another show with you because I think there's more ground to cover here yet. But just to wrap up, a couple of quick fire questions I like asking my guests, bit off their wall. What hidden talent do you have outside of work that you really share with anybody?
Well, you made me share this poetry thing.
I got it in up front. Awesome. What's the one album that's always on your playlist?
I'll have to go back to like nostalgic Indian music. So Kishore, let's go with Kishore Kumar for that one.
Okay, you're going to have to send me a link so I can let to some of that on Spotify.
Sure.
Excellent. And finally, who do you recommend as a guest on the show for future?
I would say you'll have to say, I think some of the folks from the ones that maybe someone from the engineering team, you have customers, partners. I haven't heard much from folks in the engineering team.
Give me a name.
Rajesh Munshi is one person that comes to mind. Fantastic. I mean, I've such a nice guy. He runs a 40-person team in under Geo. Geo is Ryan Cunningham's engineering counterpart. Yeah, and Rajesh is on his team. So he'd be someone I'd recommend just for a different kind of more inside point of view. And Lauren Taylor might be another one to have on the show from a customer standpoint.
Excellent. Sameer, it's been fantastic to have you on the show. Before you go, if people want to follow your blog online, I take it you're on the PowerApps site. Where can they find you, or how can they, I don't know, are you on Twitter or any other way they can see on the social media side of things?
Yeah, Twitter is probably the easiest. I'm now there at Sameer Bhangar. So it's just my first name, last name. It's the easiest way to look me up, or look me up on LinkedIn.
Hey, thanks for listening. Have you established a Center for Excellence within your organization? Or do you have a story to share about how you're using PowerApps, Flow, or the Power Platform? Feel free to get in touch with me. Reach out on any of the social media channels, NZ365 Guy, you're bound to find me. I'd love to have a chat. Full show notes can be found at nz365guy.com/116. Until next time, have a great week.